Hey guys, Youngblood with you for the 92nd episode of the Inbox, starting off with a question from Louis Horwood saying about holding cells. Can you hold players in holding cells? If so, wondering if there's anything that stops people from other people keeping them in cells forever. So yeah, with holding cells, you can put players in holding cells. It's kind of one of the key bounty hunting mechanics that's in the game, and we see those holding cells in several ships. Now, what the way this is actually going to work out is like once you're actually apprehended by another player, you're probably going to be led to a holding cell, and then once you're actually put in the holding cell, that's when you're going to end up having the option to kind of be swapped out for an NPC, and it almost is going to treat it like like a death in a way. Not necessarily like a death, but there's going to be kind of like a warping thing. So basically, somebody's not going to be able to just put you in a holding cell and keep you in there forever, unless I guess you're a voluntary, participant in that activity. So what's likely going to happen is you'll probably end up respawning at almost like a booking facility, or maybe like a sentencing facility or something like that, to where you can end up like paying fines, or you can end up just kind of starting on your way and ending up repairing your reputation. But you're not necessarily going to just be spending the next year of in-game time in prison serving out your sentence. So there's going to be some like hot swap, and then the person that actually apprehended you is then going to have like an NPC in your holding cell that ends up kind of riding along with them, that they then get to play out the mechanics of taking them in and actually processing them at some facility. Spindog says, "Hey Youngblood, I have a question for you about how believe electronic warfare will work with ships that specialize in that. Could you hack a ship and open all airlocks or lock it down? Maybe how do you see that being part of the finished game?" So there's a couple different ways this could potentially happen. One is maybe using a ship like the Herald and actually you kind of just tapping into their systems. I don't know if they've really gone into detail on that. I think it would probably have to be involving like if they had some sort of like open comms channel to where you're able to actually get in and manipulate systems through that option. I don't think you're going to necessarily just be able to point a Herald at a ship and say, boom, you're disabled. I think with electronic warfare, it's really going to be more along the lines of like I'm spoofing different signatures on radar, so you think there's more people here, or maybe I'm end up jamming signals so you're not necessarily seeing what's around you. When you start getting into things like hacking, I think that's where we get into like the data spike missile and that kind of gameplay, to where you actually fire off a data spike missile, it ends up locking onto the ship, it actually attaches to the ship, and then you gain some access to that ship, and then what you can do from that point is probably going to be a combination of what's right for gameplay and what is going to be kind of skill based. So for example, you latch on that missile, and maybe it's really easy to do things like shut off engines or maybe shut off the shields or something like that. But if you want to actually open up an airlock through a data spike missile, then maybe it's a more skill based thing where you have a certain amount of speed, or you're able to actually focus, or you have to kind of solve problems faster. Like I think that's where we're probably going, because, and I think we've seen this kind of mentioned in like the repair mechanic discussion, is they want to make these things not arbitrary. Mining is the same way. They want to make it so the people that are actually more skilled are going to be able to be more proficient in doing the job. So I think when you start talking about actually hacking, I think that's where you're going to start seeing some sort of like mini game in a way that ends up kind of telling you what options you have available with that type of weaponry. So I think it's just going to kind of depend. And something like a data spike, we don't know enough about it. It's one of those things that's just kind of been mentioned off and on. Could a Saber technically put one of those on? Maybe. I don't know if it has to integrate with like the servers that are on like a Herald, so maybe like a Caterpillar, which has a big computer on it, could do it, but maybe not a fighter. I don't know that, and I don't think anybody does at this point, so we just need to kind of hang tight and see what else we get. Andrew LeBrun says, do you think we'll ever see a gunship akin to the LAAT or the LAAT-C from Star Wars, something that is fast, moves troops, has anti-personnel turrets, not to mention the C variant being able to lift heavy cargo like tanks and such? I'm not sure we're ever going to see anything like the C variant, because that starts getting into a lot of different categories where all of a sudden it becomes a little bit more challenging to balance that. That being said, though, there's something that's fast, moves troops, has anti-personnel turrets. I mean, I think in my mind that's a perfect fit for the Redeemer. Now, as far as actually, do we ever think we'll see it? I don't know. Basically, the information we got earlier this week was that it's not a priority. They don't really need it. So it sounds like it's not even on the roadmap at this point, which is kind of disappointing considering that's one of my favorite ships, if not my favorite ship, based on design and idea of what it should be. But, I mean, what you get is you get a drop ship, so you can carry troops. You get, it should be relatively fast based on its size. It's got the turret on the bottom, the turret on the top. It's got the it's going to end up having kind of the shoulder-mounted weapons on the wings or on the nacelles. So I mean, you get a lot of like coverage with the ship. So it could end up, now it's not necessarily like the same thing as like the Hammerhead where you've got like completely oscillating turrets on the outside of the ship, but it's pretty close to that. So as far as what's going to be the closest thing to a LAAT from Star Wars, hands down the Redeemer. Now in regards to the C variant, they did say, or not they did say, there was I guess some like, it may even have been community art at this point, but people kind of talked about like the design of how that tail sticks out and how it almost looks like there's a winch there. So maybe you can carry a rover or something behind it. Based on the size of the rovers we've seen, I don't think that's going to be a possibility. I think that's kind of more of a pipe dream. So I would say don't count on the LAAT C, but the LAAT, I think the Redeemer's your best bet. Nerf Wars says, can I or will I be able to change weapon priorities of seats in a ship? For example, could I give weapons priority to the co-pilot instead of the pilot in a Cutlass Black? So if you're saying like you want to be able to say, I want my co-pilot to be able to actually fire my primary weapons, I would say that's maybe possible. I think right now, I think you actually should be able to give them the ability to, lock and use missiles. The problem is going to be with the orientation, right? Like you get you're seated in a position to where you get the actual HUD elements that show where you should be firing based on your orientation. Now, if the co-pilot seat ends up getting that, or maybe the helmet of the co-pilot gives them that visibility, then you may be able to get that, though you're going to be seeing things a little bit differently since you're sitting up higher. So instead of seeing lasers firing straight out, you're going to kind of look at them almost down on the missiles or the lasers as they're being fired. So it gets a little bit complicated there, though we do know in ships like the Super Hornet, you get that Rio seat to where the actual co-pilot should be able to control the actual turret. So we know some of that functionality is going to be there, and like in the Cutlass, for example, you may be able to say, I want my co-pilot to remote control my turret, which wouldn't be a great option, considering the loss of overall, visibility, but they would have more control over the ship from that seat. So it's kind of a give and a take. Now, in this question, if you're saying you want to be able to say, I want my co-pilot's weapons to be able to take more priority than my piloting weapons, I think you're going to be able to see some of those same sliders as far as how much power you're actually dedicating to those. But I think you're talking about more in the kind of first section, and I think it's probably going to, 1, vary by seat, 2, vary by the computer that's on board, and then 3, it just may not be practical to where they don't even put it in, but we'll just have to see. Dragon Templar 4 says, could players do jobs on planets, such as planetside security or more illegal activities? Absolutely. I think there's going to be plenty of interesting things that happen on planetside, especially now that we start getting the land claims and once people actually start setting up their outposts. People are going to want to pay for security. There's going to be people that are going to want to be growing space weed, and they're going to want to have their own drug labs like there is on Yella. There's going to be people that steal things and actually store them in their outpost on planet side. So that's kind of an illegal activity. Some people are just going to want to be peaceful farmers. But yeah, the idea is you end up getting an environment to where you can do basically anything that you want to do in the game. And if what you want to do, it happens to be on planet side, it sounds like you could potentially play this game for years and not even leave a moon if you didn't want to, assuming you pick the right location and the supply line there's okay. Fumbles says, hey Youngblood, do you think we'll be able to steal ships from the Vanduul and either keep them or sell them to other players or NPCs for some kind of bounty? So yeah, I think we're going to be able to steal Vanduul ships. Now, I think it's going to be incredibly challenging. I think the way that ends up looking like is you probably end up having to disable the ship. I don't think you're going to be sneaking onto a king ship and walking out of there with, a scythe or a glaive or a blade or something like that. I think the more likely scenario is maybe one is landed on a planet and you sneak up to it and take off, leaving the Vanduul stranded behind, which I think would be a crazy thing to even happen. Or you end up disabling the ship, through like electronic warfare. But then you still got to get the guy out of there, which is a problem too. So chances are, I think what you're going to see is you'll probably end up damaging the ship or disabling it to where there's no way for that ship to actually be, removed. Then you actually swoop in with something like a crucible or something like that to where you can actually just put it in the hull of the ship and then you end up flying away with it. Now, the complicated part, not that the first part wasn't complicated, but the complicated part there is going to be what is the long-term plan for how that works. And I think we get some, kind of questionable information over the last couple weeks in regards to piracy and stealing ships and how often that persists. And we kind of got some questionable answers as far as like, you have it until you log out and then you don't have it anymore, which I think we all knew wasn't going to be the way it was going to work long term. It doesn't fit with the mission they've kind of set for the game. I think what you're going to end up seeing is for stolen ships, it ends up being you can't go to certain spaceports. It's kind of labeled a hot ship. People are going to come after it, blah, 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 blah. This is kind of in a weird gray area because the Vanduul are an enemy, right? So if you steal one of those ships, it's not necessarily like you're going to be labeled a thief. That would be like saying like, I stole a truck from ISIS. Is the U.S. government really going to care? You know what I mean? So I don't know the way this is all going to work out. Theoretically, yes, you should be able to steal them. You should be able to sell them. You should be able to keep them. But there's just game mechanics that are in flex right now, and we just don't really know what it's going to land on, especially considering some of the comments we've seen. So I think what we're seeing is internally they're trying to figure out that type of gameplay and how they're going to track all of those items. One of our last two questions are patron questions, starting off with one from Shepard saying, do you think CIG would do another Galactic Tour? What about having it in-game? Are all ships commercials in canon? So yeah, I think we're going to start seeing more and more of the Galactic Tours. I think everybody really enjoys the Galactic Tours. We kind of got a little bit of that in the last CitizenCon and holiday sale time frame. Though it wasn't nearly as in detail as it was in prior ones. As far as having it in-game, once we get other systems, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that ends up becoming something that you can go to. I think it would be a really cool thing to see, is walk in this giant hangar and see all these ships and NPCs walking around. I think it would just be really neat. And are all the ships commercials in canon? Yeah. Everything that you're seeing in the commercials are designed to be things that you could walk around a spaceport and see the commercial playing on the screen. Or maybe hear it over a loudspeaker somewhere. And actually today in Port Alizar, occasionally if you stand in a certain location, you can actually hear some of the commercials taking place. So the commercials are in canon. There's things that you should actually see in the verse. And those are probably going to be themes that we see kind of going across the the time frame. And the last question is Solithcar saying, why windows and not 360-degree sensor arrays in different wavelengths? It's a good question. I think it's a complicated answer. I think as far as why Windows, it's kind of familiar for us. I think it's what we're used to seeing. Windows in lore, at least for some manufacturers, are actually kind of like a diamond-plated glass that are supposed to be more, if not, or the similar, if not more durable than like the actual hull of the ship. So you actually get a damage improvement there, theoretically. And then, it just kind of gives that familiar design so you know what you're actually looking at. Now, there are some ships, when I say some, there's one ship in the game that doesn't actually have cockpit glass, but you're still able to see through it, and that's actually the Prowler. That's the Asperia recreation of the Tevran Prowler. Now, as far as just 360-degree sensors and different wavelengths, basically, you want to look any direction and be able to see outside of the ship. One, it might be confusing when you're actually walking around in the ship where it all ends. Two, I think that's a really complicated thing to program and actually get into the game. And then three, maybe that just becomes something else that's likely to be damaged in combat. You start talking about higher technology that could potentially be fragile. If it takes damage and you end up losing that capability, then you're unable to see out of your ship, which is a problem. Cockpit glass is low tech, but it's effective. So that's it for this episode of The Inbox. If you guys have questions, get them in. Otherwise, stay tuned for more and have a great day. Take care.